We do these webinars now fairly regularly. Hello, it's Francis Seeley again, introducing another webinar with the Give Us a Chance Consortium, GUAC. We do these webinars now fairly regularly, and we cover a whole range of different topics, and month by month, we hope to increase these so that they go on the GUAC website and you have a really good database of good material, which is about good practice, which can be shared and exchanged. What we did in the last webinar is we did a discussion about the issues that were coming up in the general election, because it was just before the actual June the 8th date. And that was quite an interesting discussion. And what we thought we would do today is we would do a sort of post-mortem on that election. Post-mortem is probably the best word to use, because that election was a surprise for everyone, I think, not least of all the government. And in the election, a number of issues around social housing came up, and social care, which to some extent impacts on social housing. And since then, of course, we've had the Grenfell Tower fire, which also relates to the whole issue of social housing. And that raised the issue of inequality and austerity, and to some extent that has now become a big issue. And GUAC is in the centre of that in terms of its efforts to try and bring people back into employment and to redress the balance of in society. So what they're doing is a really fantastic job. Anyhow, there are some implications now from that general election, and we'd like to begin to talk about those. But before we do that, we're going to go to Ian, first of all, who I think wants to say something about GUAC, though I'm sure many of you know about that already and you are members, but he also wants to make one or two announcements. So let's begin by going to Ian, and then we'll go into the post-mortem of the general election after that. So thanks for joining us, Ian, and over to you.
Thank you, Francis. I think you used the term post-mortem about 3 times then in your introduction. Maybe that was quite instructive. Yeah, from my perspective, I'm pleased, and thanks everybody for coming on the webinar this morning. And as Francis has mentioned, this morning's session really is going to be led by Jenny to talk about the potential impact of the general election. My request of you all watching this morning, and it does relate to Jenny's presentation, is as Give Us a Chance members, you will have been asked given the email call out from Salford University for the Proving Value project. This is massively important to us, and I think it's got a direct relationship to what Jenny's going to talk about, which is what is it that we're doing as housing providers now to help our customers into employment, and how can we use the work we're doing to influence whatever the political the direction of the political direction of travel, and ensure that we are right at the front of all this on behalf of our customers. And allied to that point is a call from me for people, if you've not yet replied, it's the Give Us a Chance member day on the 14th of Friday, the 14th of July, at Guinness's offices in London. And I'd ask if you've not yet replied, please do, and it's an RSVP to Lindsay. I'll shut up now, if that's all right, and hand over to Jenny. Thank you.
Hi, great. If you just bear with me a moment, I'm just going to share the presentation. It takes me a second. So, yeah, a few weeks before the general election, we did a webinar just like this about what to expect with the election coming up. And obviously, we knew that it was going to be quite a volatile time in politics. We decided to do a follow-up. Kind of what now, what's happened, and what next immediately after the election. So today we're just going to run through a bit about what you can expect the election, and we're going to cover off where we are now, how we got here, the key political challenges on the horizon, things that we're facing now that we probably weren't necessarily expecting to happen, even though we knew it was relatively volatile at the time, and timeframes and what to expect next. if you got any questions throughout the session, just drop them on the text in the text box. Francis will pass them over to me. I think it's quite relevant saying that politically everything is up in the air, and the best way to cover this session is kind of more in a discursive way. So if there's any points that you want to raise, they're going to be exceptionally valid. You have your perspective, and the truth is nobody really knows what is going on. So do pass on any comments you have, any questions, and we'll try and make it as discursive as possible throughout. So three main things now that have impact on you as housing providers in the employment space post the elections. We've obviously got the hung parliament. We've got the supply and confidence deal with the DUP, but we've also got Brexit looming over us. We take them each in order and have a look at what they mean and where they've come from, if you like. The hung parliament, the Tories, as we know now, we don't need to rehearse it too much, but the Tories received 318 seats in the House of Parliament. Now they need the magic number of 326 to get a working majority. So they were 8 seats short of that, so 318 versus 326. Now it's quite a similar situation to which we found ourselves in 2010. The Tories again there failed to hit that magic number, 326 mark. So they went into the coalition with the Lib Dems. Now at that time, that coalition was quite workable. The Lib Dems did exceptionally well during the election campaign in 2010, and they were willing and quite able to go into coalition with the Conservatives in 2010. But this time round, I think the Lib Dems are very scarred from that coalition government. But not least, they didn't have anywhere near enough seats to really make up that magic number this time round. But ideologically, where we are now with Brexit, it's only the Conservative Party that are really pursuing, or certainly at that time, were really pursuing the hard Brexit, hard leave campaign. So from the Lib Dems perspective, it was beyond the realm possibility for them as a very much a Remain party, ideologically and functionally very very much Remain. They couldn't enter into a coalition with Conservatives. So and obviously the Conservatives could and would never form a coalition with Labour. So we found Theresa May kind of scrabbling around a little bit, trying to find a partner that she could work with in a hung parliament situation, somebody that would A, support her policies, centre-right policies, and B, support her policy on Brexit. And there's few and far parties really ideologically that fit that brief, which brought her to the DUP over in Northern Ireland. And it really was the only logical working solution to her problem. They had 10 MPs in Parliament, enough to get her over that magic number line. And they were right of centre. They're actually on social policies, very far right of centre. On Brexit, they did campaign for leave, but they're actually quite economically centre. They understand with Brexit that it has a very different opinion. There's a very different public opinion in Ireland and Northern Ireland around Brexit, and they want to kind of safeguard some of the rights that they have from the European Union. So they're much more soft at Brexit, but they still want to leave the European Union. So for Theresa May, there was no other real option in that situation than to form an agreement with DUP. Now, of course, that then led to this confidence and supply agreement. And it should not be overstated how difficult that agreement was to create. In the coalition government in 2010, when that coalition agreement was being brought about, that took 10 days to create. At the time, we called it 10 days in May, and it was an exhaustive document. Now, the reason why that took so long to create an agreement to sign off was there was a huge range of policies that they were agreeing in 2010. The coalition agreement was pages long, and it was very exhaustive, and it really set out what they were going to achieve in that term. Theresa May has taken an exceptionally long time to get to this confidence and supply agreement with DUP, and you've now seen the detail of it, and it's exceptionally light. So that tells us that actually all that negotiation with the DUP and Theresa May's team has actually been thrashing out some of the big stuff and not really looking at the detail of it. We can go into that now. Let's have a look at really what that detail of the deal was. We see here, this is quite telling. This is one of the opening statements in the deal, and it says that the DUP basically will agree to the budget, agree to support Theresa May on the budget, finance bills, money, supply, And then it goes on to say the UK's exit from the EU and legislation pertaining to national security. So what we know from this is that the DUP have only agreed to support Theresa May and the Conservative government on budget, finance, economy, Brexit and defence. That's all that their agreement pertains to. There's nothing else there that says we will have a working agreement on wider policies. It's essentially that. So we know from that all the manifesto agreement, but all the manifesto commitments that we saw from the Conservative manifesto in the run-up to the last election, a huge amount of housing, a huge amount of social housing, a huge amount on social care, rather, that has essentially been dropped from Theresa May's focus for the next few years. We know that in terms of her working majority, these are things that she can now agree to get through with the support of the DUP. Now the deal goes on to say a few more things. It says here, top line, support on matters will be agreed on a case-by-case basis. Now this line is important because it reflects liberal conservative concerns. So centrist conservative MPs concerns that the DUP are extremely socially right on some social policies, and we've seen that play out already in Parliament yesterday around things like abortion rights, gay marriage. We understand that this line was taken from a lobby within the centrists of Conservative MPs. They didn't want their party to be seen to be leaping to the right on social policy. So I think that's quite important. The committee, the second point here about creating a committee to agree things. Now this is important because the Northern Irish Secretary is basically not taking the lead on these policies, so it can't be seen as partisan. The working agreement of how the DUP and the Conservative Party work going forward will be basically run by a committee, and that's important to bring on all the other parties within Northern Ireland, all the other political parties that have seats in Parliament. They will be reassured that actually a committee should be much more broad in how it can deal with politics in Northern Ireland. And then the third point here, both parties have agreed there will be no change to the triple pension lock. Again, that was a relatively controversial point within the May's manifesto. It's relatively reassuring to a number of people in the UK, but it looks like there will be no movement on that in this term at least. And then finally, this last point hasn't had much attention in the press, but it's hugely important. The agreement reached will remain in place for the length of Parliament and can be reviewed by mutual consent of both parties. What that's telling us is that if Theresa May stands down, then this agreement still stands. So she can be replaced in a leadership contest, potentially by another member of the Conservative Party, but this agreement has a lifespan beyond her own lifespan as leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister of the country. So it's quite telling, I think in part, it's quite telling that they've put that in there because it shows that there's acknowledgement of the uncertainty of their own leadership, of Theresa May's own leadership. Before, I think we've covered Brexit there in terms of one of the main priorities for the DUP and the Conservative agreement. But one of my key views is that Brexit and the economy will dominate the continuation of power, continuation of policy as we go forward, particularly for the next 2 years and to the lifetime of the Brexit negotiations. And if we look here now at what some of the main challenges are for Theresa May and in terms of policy, I think we've seen austerity has really dominated, it certainly really dominated the election campaign. And it was something that when the election got called, austerity wasn't really a dividing factor, and it wasn't a top factor going into the election. But the poor campaign of Theresa May and the good campaign, the very, very good grassroots campaign of Jeremy Corbyn meant that actually people were starting to articulate their frustration with austerity and their frustration with lack of a visible strong future, which culminated in an attack on austerity. So I think this austerity problem isn't going to go away for Theresa May. We've already seen her relax a few key issues that she wanted to claw back further on. We've seen the triple lock, we've seen the winter fuel payments that were going to be means tested, and we've seen kind of her take a step back from some of those issues that would have taken austerity further. She did verbally signal before that austerity was coming to an end, but then she attempted to introduce policies that went against her saying that. So it'll be really interesting to see. She must understand one of the reasons why she didn't get an overwhelming majority at the election is because she didn't get the mood and the sentiment of the country right. And to get that sentiment right, she needs to kind of really address that problem. Housing policy. This is quite an interesting one. I've just talked about how what the key priorities are for Theresa May and the team for the next 2 years or so. And going into this election, we actually wrote a paper at C Media. We talked about how the Tories' policies on housing would be relatively light in the manifesto and in the next, if it was a Tory government, and all they would do essentially would be to dust out the housing white paper and pull out a few key policies, and housing wasn't going to be the same priority that it was under Cameron and Osborne, and it has been for the last few years. And I think that's definitely true. I think the way that we've seen Brexit shape up, the way that we've seen now some of the austerity issues coming out to play, housing is only going to really be tackled within that context. I don't think we're going to see it as a mainstay of Tory policy for the next 2 years, certainly. I think Grenfell Tower does change that a little bit. I was at a NHF CIH conference this week and heard that local government minister talk about Grenfell Towers and how there's going to be some immediate policies that will come out off the back of it. And I think bar Grenfell Tower and the immediate reaction that needs to be put in place in terms of policy to prevent any tragedy that having that scale and to really promote fire safety and quality housing, I don't think we're really going to see a push on any flagship housing policies coming out of the Conservatives. I think they'll try and devolve it as much as they can to local councils, to the GLA, and to other devolved bodies, and give it very much kind of make it a local solution, which is very much in keeping with Conservative policy, but it means it doesn't need to become a focus of theirs over the next few years. Beyond that, I think housing policy, we'll see a back step in terms of priority that it's had previously. Ministerial appointments. This is quite an interesting one. So we've seen David Gauke become DUP Secretary of State. He's quite a well-prepared, seasoned hands, if you like. He's quite experienced. He's very talented. He's very, very intelligent. Is very well respected within the Conservative ranks. Has been seen to be doing a good job, and is liked from most parts of the party, from the centrists and from the right side of the party. So it'll be interesting. So I think he's certainly not a controversial appointment for DWP. When you consider that DWP historically has had some quite controversial appointments like IDS, etc. This certainly isn't one of those. It's quite interesting and quite telling that half the team at DWP, half the ministers did stay on and weren't reshuffled out. I'd be inclined to suggest that probably says more about Theresa May and her inability to do a complete reshuffle because of her strength or lack of it, than it does actually say about the strengths of those ministers within those posts. Good ministers tend to get reshuffled out, and although they have been, Penny Mordaunt and Damien have done a good job and have been seen to be doing a good job, it's quite interesting that they haven't moved on and been promoted because they've done a good job. So I think that's quite interesting, and it's one to watch as well. But I think the most interesting thing, certainly being at CIH, was the Alok Sharma appointment as housing minister, somebody that has seemingly no background in housing, has a corporate background before he went into politics, has opposed quite a few flagship housing developments in his own area, in his own constituency, and regionally beyond that, and has never certainly talked that much or talked that fluently about housing. When you compare that to Gavin Barwell, for instance, Gavin actually did take an active interest in housing in Croydon because as a Croydon MP, he was at the front face of the housing crisis and seeing that locally translating in Croydon. And he was actually quite involved in housing before he got that appointment. So I think this is quite an interesting appointment. He failed to attend CIH, failed to attend failed to deliver a speech, which is the first time in 22 years that a housing minister hasn't addressed CIH conference, and how that goes down amongst housing stakeholders, as you can imagine, is not good at all. So it'll be interesting to see how Alok recovers from that, how he performs in his brief, and if he manages to change some of those opinions around. Now, of course, I should say as well that the reason that he cited for not attending conference was that he was dealing with the Grenfell Tower situation and taking a very hands-on approach to it, which is understandable. But I think that the way that translates to your housing stakeholders at a time of need, when the sector really does need leadership, post Grenfell and post austerity as well, that leadership really just felt lacking at the CIH conference. So it'll be interesting to see how he recovers, and whether or not he lasts the course. We've seen so many housing ministers being reshuffled out of post in the last 10 years, and it's whether or not he will become one of them or he will stay the course. And then finally, another election. This is one of my favourite debating topics at the moment. Many people think that there will be an election in the autumn. There have been a few commentators to say that, and people are starting to put money on that. I think anything, nothing's predictable at the moment. I would hesitate making that prediction on the fact that I think Theresa May and the Conservatives can read the national mood, and the national mood is telling them that we don't want another election. We want them to get on with the job, and they've also, this is quite important, they've played two gambles and lost badly on two gambles. They played the Brexit gamble, they lost badly, and they played the election gamble and they lost that badly. And I reckon they're a bit shy of trying a third gamble here. It'd be more likely that Theresa May would stand down in the autumn and have another leader of the party, a new MP, new Prime Minister. That's, I think, more likely, more of a safe option for the Conservatives. And certainly the main priority for the government and the country is getting through Brexit, getting a good deal, and then creating a new debate around whether or not to hold an election. So if I was Theresa, if I was advising Theresa, I would say come out to the public and say that your only main priority and your only priority and your main priority is getting through Brexit, and then committing to hold an election immediately post Brexit in 2 years' time. And I think many people would warm to that commitment and be relieved that they weren't going to be having another election. I don't think it's certainly not good for business. It's not good for the country to continue to elect. So that in terms of predictions, that's where we are. Everything's up in the air. In terms of policy, we still don't know. We've seen the Queen's speech relatively narrowly go through. The real test for relatively narrowly go through yesterday. The real test for Theresa May isn't the Queen's speech. In fact, it's when bills start to go through Parliament. So come September, October, after summer recess, if Theresa May can get her bills through Parliament without too many stumblings, without too many defeats, without too many amendments, in fact, then she can hang on to power. So that's the first real milestone in terms of seeing can she hold on. And until then, we kind of just have to wait and see, and just hope that strong leadership emerges, and that the deal with the DUP is good for housing and good for employment. And that's all of it from me. I'd really like to hear your views on all of it, but particularly the last point, on whether or not you think there will be an election, and what next for you.
Okay, that's great. All right, well, thanks. That was a really good summary of what the position is now, compared with what position we thought was going to happen when we did the previous webinar before the election. and so we're in the situation that we're in. Okay, if anyone has questions or points they want to raise, please type them in and we'll put them to Jenny. And again, Ian, if you want to say anything, please do. But let me start off. In the last webinar, Jenny, you talked a lot about how we can influence or what steps we can take to influence decision making and Parliament. Is there any further advice you'd give in the present circumstances of how we can influence Parliament and government now we have this hung Parliament? Has the situation changed in the way we go about that, or is it the same? Do we have to think differently now?
I think that's a very good question, and it's one that, in terms of how you can influence changed, and has the way that you do it and the opportunity to do it change. I think the answer to that is definitely yes, for two reasons. When we talk about uncertainty, when we talk about the likelihood of another election, MPs are going to also be thinking that. And they're going to be worried about their own majorities. They're going to be worried about local support, and they're going to be feeling very vulnerable. So reaching out and engaging and supporting your local stakeholders, your local MPs, is a good opportunity, and they're likely to be receptive to that. They're likely to be focused on being re-elected and maintaining those local commitments than they are to an actual national policy debate, which is so uncertain. And we've seen that happen. We saw that happen at the last election, actually, in some of the seats in London. And actually, Gavin Barwell, to talk about him, is quite a good example of that. He was quite popular locally, took his eye off the ball, had a very slim majority, took his eye off the ball once he became housing minister, focused on national policy, took his eye off the local ball and lost the seat. And I think that serves as a good example, a good reminder to MPs that actually just kind of keeping more in the loop, keeping re-engaged, making sure you're doing the local work and focusing on that. And they will be aware of that. So finding ways to engage, taking MPs out on tours, bringing them into meetings, getting them in to visit your residents and visit the people that you're helping with employment support work, all of that kind of work is likely to be attractive to MPs, particularly if they've just won their seat for the first time.
So are you saying that in the present circumstances where MPs they aren't in a government where there's a big majority, they're likely to be more sensitive to their local electorate and listen a lot more carefully because A, they want to keep their seats, and B, in government, they have more influence in those circumstances?
Yeah, I think the government thing is perhaps a bit different. I think no one knows what policy. So let's talk about, so the second part of that question that you asked was about how to influence kind of like national policy. And I think we don't really know what the national policy is. We don't really know kind of what we do know that the manifesto commitments are basically unable to be enacted. So everything is up in the air in terms of national policy. So yes, there is opportunity to influence there. You wouldn't ordinarily do it through your local MPs. You'd find other routes to influence national policy through select committees, parliamentary select committees, and through other working groups. But I think you need to be doing both. You need to be engaging with your local MP, and also if you do have an issue, for instance, with GUAC, we lobby nationally on national policy issues on behalf of our members, and we will do that through a range of different tools as well.
Okay, Ian, please come in if you want. But the other thing is that we saw yesterday that 40 Tory MPs have indicated to Theresa May that on nurses' pay, if she keeps the cap on, they may revote on a vote-by-vote basis. Does that mean that, for example, on housing matters, we should look at MPs who tend to take a view that housing associations want and lobby them, not just your own MP, but MPs who are sympathetic, because in this Parliament, they're going to have a lot more influence?
I think that's quite an interesting example, because the nurses' wage stuff is a symptom of kind of the austerity stuff, isn't it? And I think it kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier about austerity is more important. People are more tired of austerity than they ever have been before, and there's definitely those MPs that rebelled against it are probably more sensitive to that. And I think the housing stuff, yes, you can be finding MPs that are sensitive to housing issues and using that as a tool. I think GUAC members should be relatively careful when finding MPs that aren't in their constituency and lobbying with them, because legally MPs outside of your constituency, so MPs that operate where you don't operate, can't get involved in your matters unless they are select committee members, unless they are on an interest group. They can't actually get involved in your issues. I think I would advise people that want to lobby to really kind of use the GUAC links that we have. Go through Lindsay, talk to Lindsay about any key issues that you have, and then we can talk together about what you want to influence in terms of policy stuff. I would advise GUAC members to engage locally, really, where they have MPs.
So, I mean, Ian, maybe I can ask you, is this now a big opportunity for GUAC to step up their lobbying and their influencing side of what you do, because of what Jenny's just said, that, you know, if your members are very interested in a particular topic, you can look more carefully now at MPs that might support you. You can look at all party parliamentary groups. You can work with them in a way that probably wasn't possible before the election. In other words, the door is open to you in a way that it wasn't before.
Well, thanks, Francis, and thanks, Jenny. If I'm honest, I'm sat here and I'm fascinated to listen to what Jenny's saying. And it is a difficult environment for any of us that are involved to work in. And I'm sat here just thinking that the work we do as Give Us a Chance, which is obviously supporting our customers into work, there is an opportunity for us to both share the best practices that are, you know, that Give Us a Chance members are involved in and the partnerships that we're involved in, but also proving the value of what we bring. I know I keep bringing it back to this, you know, the Proving Value project with Salford and the fact that they're coming to the member day on 14th of July. It just makes me think that in addition to supporting all of the influencing and the routes that yourself and Jenny are sharing with us, Francis, we need to do our stuff and step up and show what it is that we are actually doing to help people, in order to all of this uncertainty that we provide some stability about our offer to our customers.
I mean, Lindsay has just said quite interestingly that, you know, yes, please, let's see what we can do, but we could also help your members to link with their own MPs and to get their MPs to visit them. You could actually act as a liaison for that and try to create a relationship, which is really important. Is that something, Ian, that you would welcome?
Well, yeah, but we can provide some stability. The fact that we're all, as members, involved in employment support partnerships on behalf of customers, that's something that provides stability in whatever political climate unfolds. I think all of what Jenny's saying is just so much uncertainty, and it's absolutely right what she's saying around using it as an opportunity to influence and the different ways that we can. But one thing that we have got control of is the fact that we are helping customers into work. Despite all that's going on around us, we retain that commitment. And I guess what I'm saying is that I think it's fascinating to listen to to Jenny's presentation. The main theme, if you like, that I hear from all of this is that we need to continue to step up and do what we do it well, and we'll be there for those that want some from evidence from us, evidence about what works, and evidence of how we can help our customers. And if we keep doing the right thing and we've got the evidence to prove it, to an extent that proves us in this ever-changing political environment.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the opportunities for GUAC now are great, and the future, I think you've got, you know, a lot of opportunities to really lobby on things and bring people together. Jenny, I mean, if a housing association wants advice, they can come to GUAC, but how they actually make contact with MPs and the way they do it in more detail, where could they go to for advice? Would it be to you, or are there other people that they can go to find out how best to do that?
Yeah, we definitely to GUAC, so either to Lindsay or myself. Lindsay's details and are usually on the email newsletter that everybody gets every Monday, or you can go on the website and find out contact details for us directly. But we do facilitate support on public affairs and engagement with stakeholders and MPs. So we definitely would recommend that you get in contact with us to help you on that. Just before the election, we created a members toolkit on the website, which is a secure login area on the GUAC website, where members can go in and can download template letters to write to MPs, councillors, ward councillors, council leaders. There's some stuff there to help them with how to map those stakeholders and how to identify them. So there's a lot of support. I urge members to go on there and take a look at it and to get into contact with Lindsay or myself if you do really want to start engaging. There's also a whole raft of other things that we're doing. The Members' Day on the 14th of July, we're going to be doing a session on engagement, on stakeholder engagement. We'll be talking through some of the practicalities of this. We'll be physically mapping out members' own stakeholders. So I'd urge members to come along to that Members' Day as well. And if you've got any questions, you can talk them through directly with us there and then on the day. We're also, as part of our wider public affairs strategy, we're doing a lot of one-to-one engagement on behalf of our members. So if you've got any things, if you've got any ministers or select committee members in your patch, in your local area of your work, then let us know, and we'll make sure that we do help you to reach out to them. We are always looking at how we can engage with ministers and MPs all the time. So if that's something that you're looking at doing, definitely drop us a line. We've got a whole pipeline of exciting lobbying things up our sleeves as well that we'll reveal more details about on the Members' Day.
Lindsay interestingly says that you're thinking of starting an all-party parliamentary group. Maybe you might like to say something about that, Jenny, and explain to people as well, because some people may not know what an all-party parliamentary group is, how different it is, for example, to a select committee, and how one can start it.
Yeah, it is something that we're looking at, and it's not something that we've just definitely kind of gone ahead with yet, but an all-party group is basically, I think my favourite way of describing this is that it's like when you're at university and you have social groups, and you have a society at university that covers off anything of interest, and it's a little bit like that. You have APG groups on football, on so many different types of housing issues, and it's a group of MPs that come together who have an interest in that topic. And it has a relatively formal function. They have like a treasurer, a chair. It has a kind of an AGM, but it is just a group. It's a cross-party group of MPs that just have an interest in a certain issue. And GUAC are in early discussions with setting one up, which would basically be something to do with housing and employment, and it would bring together all the parliamentarians that want to be involved in talking and pushing housing and employment issues forward.
Yeah, but it's also fair to say, isn't it, Jenny, that an all-party parliamentary group, unlike a select committee, also contains members of the House of Lords, so that you've got quite a wide spectrum there. And what happens with all-party parliamentary groups is that often NGOs, voluntary groups outside, often service those all-party parliamentary groups. So if you had one on housing and employment, and GUAC serviced that all-party parliamentary group, and it contained members of the House of Lords as well, you really have got your foot in the door in a very big way into decision-making and influencing.
Yeah, yes, you definitely got your foot in the door. I think the influence that all-party parliamentary groups have is not as strong as it probably used to be. It doesn't really. It's the strength of an all-party parliamentary group is bringing together the people that are interested in a topic. It doesn't have any legislative powers and doesn't have any ability to influence government policy. We have seen some good examples in the past where APGs have done quite good work. So things like the cycling campaign safety issue really started in an APG group. I think the best way of describing it is it's a bit like a grassroots committee that has no real influence, but can, if it's run well and has the good support and has the right objectives, it can create impact. But it doesn't have direct power. But for GUAC and for our members, it's a great foot in the door, like you say. It's a great way of bringing together MPs and peers who are just want to talk about the topic and want to champion the work that you do, and want to create influence from that grassroots level within Parliament.
But I suppose the other thing about all-party parliamentary groups and select committees, Jenny, as well, is that often you don't get the yeah-boo sort of atmosphere you get at Prime Minister's Question Time in the House of Commons. There's a lot of cross-party work and there's a lot of agreement. So in a way, through an all-party parliamentary group, you've got a way of forging alliances between parties and having more influence. Now, it's only a beginning, but it's something you can do that way, which you can't necessarily do on the floor of the House of Commons, where the adversarial atmosphere is very prevalent.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay, that was a quick answer. Right, I mean, also because of the present circumstances we're in, where it's a hung parliament, how important is it to work with all parties, not just the party in government, because, you know, all parties are going to have an influence here. So really your lobbying should be aimed at all the parties, and you should look at who the spokesperson is in each of those parties, Jenny.
Yeah, that's true, and I think that goes back to an earlier point around we don't know when the next election may be. If it's sooner than it usually is, then yes, of course, you should definitely keep in the loop, and not just with all parties, but with PPCs, prospective parliamentary candidates. Even when you know them, it's always worth keeping in the loop with them, because you never know what will happen, and it's very easy to dismiss politicians, up-and-coming politicians, but you only have to look at Canterbury to see how things can change. They went from always being a Conservative stronghold to suddenly electing out of the blue or out of the red a Labour MP for the first time in their history, and that would have been laughable. And the same in Kensington. A year ago, we would have laughed at that prospect, and it's certainly wise and strategic to have your eye on all the balls, and not just the party of colour. I think though that I think my main message to GUAC members would be around, if you're trying to influence on policy, definitely use the links in that you have with GUAC. We have ready-made links into politicians of all colours, and you won't be starting from scratch if you engage with us to use those links. So I'd kind of advise and urge members to definitely do the local lobbying, definitely do local engagement, finding out who your MPs are, who the candidates are, even when another election comes around, and meet and greet them, engage with them, get to know them, let them get to know you, show off the great work that you do. But when it comes to kind of any national policy stuff, I'd urge you to use the resources that you have through GUAC.
Lindsay's just asked a cheeky question, but we'll put it in right now. She says, if Theresa May does stand down in the autumn or whenever, any bets on who would be her successor? Do you want to go down that line, Jenny, or do you just want to pass over it?
No, I like those kind of questions. I think a safe bet right now would be Hammond. I think his perception has been quite strong. He's got quite a good reputation. It's not unusual to hand over to the HMT, Chancellor of the Exchequer, and he's certainly positioned himself post some of May's fallouts and problems. He's positioned himself quite well, and so I wouldn't be surprised. The public don't hate him as much as they hate Boris and Gove and a number of other people. So yeah, I think he'd be a sensible bet right now, but things change so quickly, as we all know. So what's sensible now, come the autumn or whenever it could be, is you'd have to ask me again in a few months' time.
Yeah, I think it was Harold Macmillan who once said, "What changes things is events, dear boy, events."
Yeah.
But I mean, Ian, do you want to add anything here? I've got other questions I could take up, but if you want to come in, please do.
Just thanks, Francis. But on the back of what Jenny just said then, and that you're running the session at the member day on the 14th of July around communications and influencing, I'm just thinking I'd like to ask that when we discuss this at the event, we look at the strength that we've got as individual members working together through Give Us a Chance, because I think Jenny's absolutely right, working locally. My question will be, how do we translate this into something that is a powerful Give Us a Chance message? And I think there is also an allied connection, which is all the good work that we are doing locally. We're all doing it in partnership. We're in partnership with URSA on this. We've got the conference coming up with them, the second conference with them in September. We've got the alignment now with the IEP, the employability professionals, and with AELP. They're all having similar conversations, I'm sure, to us today about how do they influence future government policy in this area. So I guess what I'm pushing for is, you know, a discussion maybe on the 14th of July about how do we make this work better because we're doing it in partnership.
Yeah, well, I guess Lindsay's jotting that down for the agenda, and I mean, you'd agree with that, would you, Jenny?
Yeah, I think it's definitely worth exploring on the 14th of July with member input as well. That'd be brilliant.
I mean, one of the ways of influencing, I mean, you talked about the relationship with the DUP and confidence and supply. Maybe you might want to explain a bit what confidence and supply is, because it's supporting on a bill by bill basis. And if there's going to be a lot of bills coming on and there's only going to be, you know, you don't know how the vote's going to go on each bill, the lobbying you can have can be a lot more effective. So it does mean, doesn't it, with the confidence and supply system in place, that the bills, whether they get through or not, are problematic, and therefore lobbying becomes a very, very powerful tool in those circumstances.
Yeah, so the confidence supply agreement is kind of, when we talked on some of the earlier slides, when we looked at what they are agreeing, what the DUP agreeing to form, where they're agreeing to form partnerships of agreement with the Conservative Party, and it's got quite a narrow remit. So it's the economy, finance, defence, Brexit, and kind of those very macroeconomic stuff, if you like. They've agreed to take everything else on a case-by-case, review-by-review basis. And it does create opportunity for lobbying around that. Again, GUAC will be doing a lot of work once everything settles down. At the moment, we've got a very unclear political environment, which creates an exceptionally unclear policy arena. So once that settles down, GUAC will be working to really review some of our policy commitments, some of our policy asks of government. Once we know what the direction, the future policy of housing and employment support looks like, when we know that, we'll start lobbying, engaging with ministers, engaging with the department civil servants, and really raising some of our key issues, and certainly hoping to be looking for opportunities in this kind of uncertainty that allows us to push for that.
Does that make sense to you, Ian? Watching out carefully for each bill that comes up and then taking it as a case-by-case approach and seeing what influence you can have on each of the bills that is relevant to you and your mission.
Yes, and I'm sorry to keep repeating this. I guess I'm conscious that I'm making the same point. Give Us a Chance has moved on a little bit now from talking about policy and talking about influencing. We've moved on now, I think, to gathering real evidence about what works. And I think that together, working with our, the partner organisations that we work with, I think that's the next phase for us to move into. And everything Jenny's saying is absolutely right around influencing and finding opportunities. But I think what is unique about Give Us a Chance, or increasingly unique about Give Us a Chance, is that we're a voice for the membership around what we're actually doing, what actually works, and giving policymakers an opportunity to work with us because we're doing something that's helping.
So your attempt to influence is based upon an evidence-based approach now. So it's more systematic than just going in and lobbying and saying, this is what we want. You want to provide the evidence and say, look at it. Let's see how we can now work together and make a difference.
I would describe us as being an effective partner in that case, and I do believe the direction that we're travelling along now as Give Us a Chance is exactly that. We're not talking; we're talking about what we're doing.
Okay, and Jenny, I mean, we're getting close to the end now, but there's not a lot in the Queen's speech or anything in the manifestos about startups and employment opportunities and housing associations. Is there anything you want to say on that, about the possibilities in that area, or do you think it's open at the moment?
Sorry, repeat that question again. So about partnerships?
Yeah, no. I mean, there's nothing about in the Queen's speech that I could see about employment opportunities and startups. Or is there anything that you've seen that we've missed out that we should be cognizant of?
No, I think it's not surprising that it hasn't really had much volume. It's not a priority for May's government currently. Whether or not things change and emerge in the future, it remains to be seen, but it certainly, housing and employment support doesn't feel like a priority, and that was reflected in the Queen's speech as well. I think I'd like to add to that, to the further point, the further discussion going forward. I agree with what Ian's saying. I think I'm certainly not advocating a new approach to GUAC lobbying, and I would encourage any GUAC members who want to get more involved in this to get in contact with us and talk about the work that we do. And certainly we are moving towards evidence-based engagement, but we will be continuing to monitor the policy environment to see where opportunities for engagement emerge. But yeah, I think our message to members is engage locally, work out who your new stakeholders is, and when it comes to national policy stuff, just talk to GUAC.
Okay, well let's finish this now. But Ian, do you want the last word on this just before we go?
No, I think Jenny just finished it off very nicely with the last thing that she said. Absolutely, that do things locally, but use the strength that gives us a chance to amplify the work that we're all doing. So, and thank you both, and particularly Jenny, for the presentation. I thought it was really good.
Okay, well, thanks, Ian. Yeah, and thanks, Jenny. That was quite good. And I think that, from what you said and from what Ian said, there are tremendous opportunities in this Parliament to have a real influence, both locally and nationally. And the way you do it, I think, is really important. So thanks, everyone, for joining us. And this obviously will go out on the website. And I think it's going to be useful for a lot of members because it does give a sort of roadmap about how people can progress this in the future. So thank you all.